Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the Saturdays for the Byzantines podcast. My name is Professor Wren. I am your host. If you're finding us on YouTube, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Google Play or any other podcast platform that this is getting pushed out to, please make sure to give us a follow and a 5-star review if at all possible. Looking at the numbers this week, we have surpassed 1,000 total views and downloads. Now that's between both YouTube views and podcast downloads. And we are close to 1,000 views on YouTube. Last I checked, we were at like 950 YouTube views between all of our total videos. So that's really great. So thank you guys a lot for watching and listening. I'm glad, a lot of people who comment say that they're really enjoying the videos, which is awesome because I'm enjoying making the videos. And if you guys are liking them, that just makes me more excited to make more content for you guys. And as time goes on, as the show grows and all of these things, we'll try to do things to make the show better. We'll get a better webcam and we'll start doing more video podcasts again, not just the audio. I can get better microphones, better lighting, more guests on. I was actually talking this past week. I know this is coming out to you on a Sunday because I was traveling yesterday, Saturday, and today, coming back from the Easter break, which my school had, which was a very nice, week-long break. And my dad and I were talking about doing a podcast on this together. So I think that would be pretty cool if I brought him on as a guest. And I have some other people in mind for who I might want to bring on as guests, or maybe just as time goes on, finding other people to go on their shows and talk about things, and bring them on my show and talk about things, so on and so forth. So really, and you guys as well, if I always say, if you have friends or family whom are interested in history, or if they're not interested in history, or if you're studying this kind of stuff in school, or if you're interested in, you have classmates, teachers, whatever, share it all over the place on social media and with people, so on and so forth. Now, today's topic, we are on part 2 of the Wars of Justinian. So last time we covered Belisarius's war against the Vandals, which got wrapped up pretty quickly. And now we are entering into the Gothic Wars, which are the complete opposite of very quick. These take a pretty long time to resolve. Although the Romans are going to have a good deal of initial success here between 535 and 540, there's going to be a bit of a 10-year lull coming up here because there's going to be a war coming up on the horizon with the Persians, which Justinian needs Belisarius for. And so we'll talk about this at the very end of this episode. Justinian is going to basically recall Belisarius from one theater and transition him into another theater of war off in the east, which is going to lead to about a decade of Gothic revival, as some might say, in Italy. And then Belisarius is going to have to come back and clean up some of the stuff that he had previously settled in Italy. So today we're going to be finishing up here with the initial part of the Romans campaign in Italy. And then the next one, in our next episode, we will talk about, I'll try to combine the Gothic revival and then the Roman response to that. And we can kind of wrap up Justinian's wars in 3 parts, and then we'll conclude with Justinian. We'll have a lecture on his buildings and his legal codex, which are the 2 other major parts of his reign, and then we'll wrap up. Then we'll wrap up Justinian and try to just trudge along further here. So one of the first things, so as we talked about where we last left off, Belisarius had taken the city of Naples from the Goths after a somewhat lengthy siege. We talked about how Belisarius initially was worried that it actually would not work out, but then it does work out. It's a pretty interesting episode if you want to go back and watch our episode. It was Justinian Wars Justinian's Wars Part 1. You can go check that out. There's a pretty interesting story there about the siege of Naples. But now, Belisarius, so after Naples, the next city up on the list is Rome, city of Rome itself. And Belisarius is actually going to enter into Rome without a fight. And this is going to lead to a couple things. Now, firstly, we should note that the Goths are going to throw out their old leader, who we were talking about in the last episode, Theodahad, who I always kind of have a chuckle about how Procopius, who has our main source for this, one of probably the most important historian of late antiquity, Procopius is always taking shots at Theodahad's manhood and is always calling him a coward and like pusillanimous and all these sorts of things. But the Goths are going to select a new leader here, which we'll read a little bit from Procopius here. This is the Wars of Justinian. Of course, we're using the translation, the Hackett Classic, translated by H.B. Dewing, and then modernized by Anthony Caldelis. So this is the Wars of Justinian, Book 5, Chapter 11, verse 5 through 5 and a bit of 6. Oh no, actually, I'm sorry. I just forgot. I want to read to you a little bit more out of this because there's a humorous story that goes along with this that I think is worth telling. I found this humorous. We'll see. Hopefully you guys like it as well. So, after gathering at Regatta, the Goths chose as a king over them and the Italians Vidigus, or you could say Vidigus as well. I'll be saying Vidigus, a man who was not of an illustrious house, but had previously won great renown in battles by Sirmium when Theodoric was waging war against the Gepids. Theodahad, therefore, upon hearing this, rushed off in flight and headed for Ravenna. But Vidigus quickly sent Optaris, a Goth, instructing him to bring Theodahad alive or dead. Now here's where the story, this is where it gets kind of juicy. This is the ancient form of the tea, if you know what that means. Now it happened that this Optaris was hostile to Theodahad for the following reason. Optaris was wooing a certain young woman who was an heiress and extremely beautiful to look upon. But Theodahad, moved by a bribe, took the woman he was wooing from him and betrothed her to another man. Oh, he's stealing this girl there. And so, not only satisfying his own rage, but rendering a service to Vidigus as well, he pursued Theodahad with great eagerness and enthusiasm. See, he's getting his revenge here for Theodahad stealing his girl and giving her to another guy. He overtook him while still on his way, laid him on his back on the ground, and slew him like a victim for sacrifice. Such was the end of Theodahad's life and rule, which had reached the 3rd year. So you see, even back in ancient times, there's still this romantic relationship drama that goes on between human beings because human nature doesn't change, as I've mentioned before on the show. I mean, look back to the Iliad. It all starts over the woman getting kidnapped and brought somewhere else. Now, as Belisarius and the Romans marched towards Rome, city of Rome, I'm referring to here, the Goths seem to be unaware. Is the best way to describe it. They're not exactly sure how big Belisarius' army is, or at least that's how it's what I'm gathering from this. Because and as well, I mean, Belisarius has not really lost a battle in any of the campaigns he's had up until this point. So the Goths are kind of afraid of this. And they are actually going to leave the city of Rome for the garrison there is going to go to Ravenna. And the Romans are going to occupy Rome without a fight. The Goths are just going to give it up. There is going to be one guy who stays behind, though, this guy named Luderus, who seems to, Procopius says, due to some sense shame of losing the city, he doesn't want to leave it behind. We'll read here as well. This is from the war, right? The Wars of Justinian, still book 5, chapter 14, verses 12 through let's see, 12 through a bit of 14 here. So, as for the Goths keeping guard in Rome, when they learned that the enemy were very near and became aware of the decision of the Romans, they were concerned for the city, and being unable to meet the attacking army in battle, were at a loss. But later, with the Romans' permission, they all departed from there and proceeded to Ravenna. Ravenna is still considered the capital city in Italy because it's very easily defensible. Except that Luderus, the commander, being ashamed, I suppose, because of his present situation, remained there. And so it happened that on that day, that at the very same time when Belisarius and the emperor's army were entering Rome through a gate they called Asinaria, the Goths were withdrawing from the city through another gate which bears the name Flaminian. So there we can see the Belisarius takes Rome without a fight, and things are looking pretty good at this point. And then from there, Belisarius is going to assert control over the surrounding countryside and towns, sometimes peacefully, sometimes with a fight. We do have to remember, I'll remind us again here, that as has been the case up until this point, when Belisarius is taking over these areas, these people are still Roman. They still probably identify themselves as Roman, definitely not as Gothic. They're probably still speaking Latin as a primary language. Now they will be. My guess is they're picking up some form of Gothic just so they can interact with their new Gothic overlords. But especially the language they're speaking in the home is going to be Latin. The language they're speaking oftentimes in like the marketplace is going to be Latin because most of the people around are Latin speaking. The language they're in church, the mass is said in Latin. So and some of these people may have a living memory of Roman rule, or certainly have heard about it from their parents or grandparents. It's also worth noting that the Ostrogoths were Arian Christians. They were not Orthodox, what we would call this time Chalcedonian Christians. And most of the Romans are going to be Chalcedonian Christians instead of Arians. All this to say that the general populace in these areas when Belisarius is coming around are going to be very friendly, Roman friendly. And they're not exactly thrilled about having these new Gothic overlords. And if you make them the offer, you can be ruled by the Goths or you can be ruled by the Romans, and the Romans share your culture, share your language, share your religion. Most people are going to be okay with that, and they're not going to resist Belisarius's army as he's coming through here. Although the Goths are going to put up a pretty resilient resistance. They're not just going to give up without a fight here as time goes on. Now there is a lot of, after Belisarius occupies Rome in Procopius, there is a lot of information about minor battles and skirmishes that go on between the Romans and the Goths in and around Rome and the surrounding countryside. I'm skipping over a lot of this just because there's so much volume of it. I don't want to get bogged down in the detail. I already kind of feel like I'm getting bogged down in a lot of details in this series. I was thinking maybe it would go faster. This is going to end up being like a 40-part, 50-part series, which is fine because as I've talked about, I think of this kind of as a lecture class series, and if you were to take a 15-week course in a semester, well, really, you're getting, what I'm doing here is a two-part course. When I took this, it was a two-part course. It's a fall and spring two-part course. And if you have an hour lecture 3 times a week, you do the math, you end up with a lot, right? It's not going to be like 10 or 15 episodes or lectures or what have you. But I mean, let me know in the comment section if you guys think that this is kind of drudging along at a slow pace, or if you kind of like the pace that we're going at. I mean, I'm figuring this out as I go. I I started doing this, and we'll figure out the details later. But anyway, so as we said, now Procopius is certainly exaggerating the numbers here when we're talking about the size of the Gothic army. Procopius claims that the Goths have a 150,000 man army. Now, this is certainly exaggerated, as simply as a point of reference. When the Persians invade Greece leading up to the Battle of Thermopylae, they show up with about 250,000 men. And that's pulling from the entirety of the Persian Empire, which is massive. And now 150,000 is still a little more than half of that. But the idea that the Goths were pulling that sized army, half of what Persia could pull from basically half of Italy, because at this point the Goths have lost half of Italy, including several of the most populated cities in Italy. They've lost Naples, they've lost Rome. They're about to lose a couple of other cities as well. The idea that they can pull 150,000 men from that area is laughable. So we just need to keep the numbers in mind here, and exaggerated numbers in mind, because that's something you always have to be mindful of when you're reading ancient sources. Regardless, we can still assume that Belisarius is pretty significantly outnumbered, though to what extent we're not really sure. Belisarius does send a request to Justinian for reinforcements. Procopius tells us that Belisarius's army contains only about 5,000 men. They start out with about 18,000, but keep in mind Belisarius needs to leave garrisons behind in all of the cities that he takes over. So he has garrisons across North Africa, in Corsica and Sardinia, in Sicily and in southern Italy. And so by this point in time, Procopius tells us that his army is whittled down to about 5,000 men. Again, give or take the numbers here, but he certainly has less men than when he started out with. Now, all of this takes place between roughly 536 and 537 in terms of the years. And as I said, these years are also spent warding off a lot of attacks from the Goths, minor skirmishes, these kinds of things, which, again, I don't want to get bogged down in the details. They are kind of interesting if you want to get yourself a copy of this book. I can, I'll try to remember to post a link to the where you can buy it on Amazon. It's fairly cheap. But now, in the end, Justinian is going to send Belisarius the help that he asked for. He gets about 1,600 Hunnic and Slavic cavalrymen. So this is interesting, in one part because it kind of goes to what I've been talking about for a while now, which is that the Byzantine army is going to become much more cavalry focused. And again, it's not to say that they are they've moved to an entirely cavalry army. That's really not the case. But as time goes on here, you're going to see, and especially as we go into the Middle Ages, that cavalry kind of is the name of the game here. It's really what's going to make and break a lot of battles. But the other interesting thing here are the mention of the Slavs. Now, this instance in the book is not exactly the first reference that we get of Slavs. I think there's a couple others before this, but we are told that they are, first of all, skilled horsemen, which, if you know anything about history and the Polish winged hussars saving the day at Vienna against the Ottomans, you know that Eastern Europeans, we are well known for our skill on a horse, and that they're being used as essentially auxiliaries in the Roman army. And this is an early appearance, an early mention of Slavs here, which are going to become more and more prevalent as time goes on. And Justinian also sends about 5,000 regular infantrymen from Constantinople. And with these reinforcements, Justinian is basically able to break out from Rome and its little surrounding area, and he's able to break out further into Italy and pursue his campaign further north. Now, also around this time, Justinian is joined by an Armenian general named Narses, he's a pretty competent general, and he comes with about 2,000 Heruli Federati. Now, Heruli were, that's just another Germanic barbarian tribe, and as we've talked about, Federati or Foederati, depending on how you say this, I've heard it pronounced both ways. These are essentially auxiliary troops. These are barbarian soldiers which are living in the Roman Empire, but they're not fully Romanized. They're kind of still separate from society here. And so Narses arrives with a group of about 2,000 of them. Now there's going to be a disagreement that breaks out between Belisarius and Narses over what to do with the city of Arimnum. Yeah. So Arimnum is under siege by the Goths. It's a counter siege. The Romans had already taken it, and there's a question of how to relieve the siege. Now Narses wants to relieve the siege kind of quickly. He wants to go right in, knock the Goths out, and move on. Belisarius, however, wanted to take a more cautious approach, maybe not go in all guns blazing and just kind of see how things develop. However, the Romans get a desperate message from the garrison of Arimnum, basically as a desperate plea for help, which ends the debate. The Romans go in, they lift the siege, and everything's fine in terms of holding on to the city, but this leads to a rift in the Roman group of subordinate commanders in the army, because some of them have now decided that they're siding with Belisarius, and some of them are now siding with Narses. So there's this kind of split here, which is going to lead to issues moving on, as we're going to see here in a second. Now, in April 538, Belisarius is going to send a small army of about 1,000 men to take Milan. Now, Milan was the second largest and second wealthiest city in Italy after Rome. It was, for a time, the imperial capital as well. The Western Roman capital had moved from Rome to Milan at one point, and then from Milan to Ravenna. Now, the small force did manage to take the city, but quickly found it was very hard to defend. The Goths managed to enlist Procopius's 10,000 Burgundian allies to help siege back Milan. Again, let's just keep in mind, maybe keep these numbers, take them with a grain of salt here. Point being is that even if it's just let's say 5,000, the Goths show up with their army, the Burgundians show up with 5,000 men or 10,000 men or whatever, and there's 1,000 Romans defending it. They're really outnumbered. They had just sieged the city. It was low on supplies. Now, Belisarius does send another army to relieve the siege, but the commanders of this army actually don't attack the barbarians when they get there. They actually ask for reinforcements, and even when some of them don't take their order immediately to attack, some of them actually want to wait for Narses to give the order. Again, as we talked about earlier, this kind of split in the subordinate commanders in the armies. Some of these guys are now saying, well, we take our orders from Narses and not Belisarius, which is really not a good situation to be in if you're the Romans. Chaos then results in the Roman garrison, as well as among the officers outside the city, and with the city on the brink of starvation. Milan is basically, at this point, eventually runs out of supplies. The Roman garrison is going to leave the city because the Goths they make them an offer, basically, that they'll let the Roman garrison leave, but then they're going to sack the city, and the populace within the city is not going to be safe. Initially, the Roman garrison, before they ran out of supplies, said, no, we're not going to do that. However, once the supplies ran out, and it was basically that you either are going to starve to death or you can walk out of the city, we'll let you go. And the people in the city are just going to be, screwed, for lack of a better word. At that point, the Romans leave. Now, about 539, or between that and 540 AD, Justinian wants to start wrapping up the war with the Goths because things are starting to heat up in the east with the Persians. Justinian makes an offer to the Goths whereby the Goths would be allowed to keep everything north of the Po River in exchange for peace. So the Romans would get basically everything south of the Po River, which kind of cuts across Italy. It's sort of like if you, it's hard to explain without a map. But they're basically cutting across the peninsular part of Italy. So basically everything that's not bordered by water, by the ocean on two sides, is what the Romans are keeping. And everything north of that is what the Goths get to keep. And this is a pretty generous, there's also other terms to this deal, like Justinian gets half of the Gothic treasury and these sorts of things. But it's a decent deal actually for the Goths. The Goths are actually pretty eager to take it because they've been getting their butts whooped up and down the Italian peninsula, and they're like, let's just get out of this war alive, guys. And Belisarius, actually, believe it or not, was kind of peeved because Belisarius says, if you just give me a little more time, I can finish the job here, Justinian. We're not just talking about getting what you've asked the Goths to give to basically give up. Not really that the Goths are handing it over to them. They're just saying, we're not going to try to take this back, although they will. But Belisarius is saying, like, we can just take these guys out here if you just give me a little more time. But Justinian is not really interested in that because he understands that the focuses need to be shifted here. Now, the Goths, interestingly, in a bit of last-minute desperation, actually offer to make Belisarius a new Western emperor, basically telling him that he can, because they understand that he's kind of peeved or annoyed or whatever you want to say. He's annoyed with Justinian. They're basically saying, well, you can just be an emperor here and you don't have to listen to anybody. You don't have to listen to that guy over in Constantinople. But Belisarius is not interested in this because he doesn't want to be like some renegade emperor. He wants to remain in a legitimate position, a recognized legitimate position. And so the terms are eventually agreed to, and the Roman army marched into Ravenna in 540 without a fight. And peace was agreed to, but not for long. As we said, the Goths are going to have a revival here coming up basically as soon as the Romans leave. So that'll be where we pick up in our next episode. So if you've made it this far in the video and if you've enjoyed it, please make sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or any other podcast platform, please make sure to give us a follow and a 5-star review if you can. You can check us out on Instagram and Facebook at Professor Wren, where I post updates about the show and various other fun things about history that I find that I think are interesting and I want to share with you guys. And so without further ado, that's all I have for you this time, and I'll see y'all next time.